It began with a sealed royal letter delivered through channels so discreet that even senior palace aides reportedly learned of it only after the decision had already been made. Whispers spread through royal corridors at astonishing speed. Something unprecedented had happened. A line had been drawn. And according to growing reports, Meghan's future connection to one of the monarchy's most powerful traditions had just been permanently altered. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. At first, the palace tried to treat it like another passing rumor, another storm that would fade before the public could understand its weight. But this was different. This was not gossip about seating plans, strained conversations, or another cold exchange between distant relatives. This was a document, a sealed royal letter. A letter reportedly authorized by King Charles himself, moving quietly through the oldest and most guarded channels of royal power. And inside that silence, one name kept rising again and again: Meghan. Insiders suggest even experienced aides were unsettled by the secrecy, because decisions involving future peerages are not handled casually. They are tied to bloodline, honor, public duty, and the long memory of the crown. Courtiers allegedly whispered that the letter did not merely discuss present tensions, but future possibilities: what could be granted, what could be withheld, and who would remain connected to the monarch's most protected traditions. The timing made everything even more explosive. Why now? Why would Charles, already carrying the burden of a weakened reign and a fractured family, allow such a step to move forward at this exact moment? Some believed it was about control. Others believed it was about protection. But those closest to the institution reportedly saw something deeper. A king trying to prevent tomorrow's crisis before it could become irreversible. For Meghan, the alleged focus of the decision, the implications were impossible to ignore. A peerage is not just a title to be admired from afar. It is a mark of belonging, a formal thread in the fabric of monarchy, a signal that history still leaves a door open. And according to these growing claims, that door had just been pushed nearly shut. Senior aides were said to be caught off guard, not because the tension was new, but because the response felt final. The palace had survived interviews, accusations, memoirs, and waves of public pressure. Yet this letter suggested a different chapter had begun, one where silence was no longer weakness but strategy, one where the crown did not argue publicly, it acted privately. And as speculation spread beyond royal offices into the wider world, the question became unavoidable. What had Meghan done, or what did the palace fear she might still do, to make such a drastic move feel necessary? But this decision was not created overnight. It was rooted in a growing conflict that had been quietly building for years behind palace walls. To understand why this alleged letter has created such shockwaves, one must first understand what a royal peerage truly represents. It is far more than a title. It is influence, legacy, prestige, and a connection to centuries of royal tradition. And according to royal observers, that connection may now be at the center of a battle unlike any seen in recent memory. In the world of the British monarchy, a peerage is never just an elegant name attached to ceremony. It is a bridge between the crown and history, a formal recognition that a person or bloodline has been drawn into the guarded architecture of royal life. Dukes, earls, counts, barons, these words may sound old-fashioned to outsiders, but inside the institution they carry weight. They signal rank, they signal trust, they signal that the monarchy is not only looking backward, but deciding who may stand close enough to its future. That is why the alleged sealed letter has stirred such intense curiosity. Because if Meghan's future connection to peerages has truly been addressed, then this is not a small administrative matter. It is a message carved into the deeper language of monarchy. For centuries, titles have been used to reward loyalty, secure alliances, protect inheritance, and shape public perception. They are not handed out without meaning. They become part of family identity, public status, and historical memory. A peerage can turn a private person into a figure of national symbolism. It can give descendants a place in the royal story long after the original dispute has faded. And that is exactly why traditionalists reportedly became uneasy. They saw future title discussions not as harmless possibilities, but as doors that, once opened, could never be fully closed again. In their eyes, Any connection between future peerages and a royal branch living outside the working structure of the monarchy had to be handled with extreme care, not out of cruelty but out of fear. Fear that prestige could become detached from duty. Fear that royal privilege might survive even where royal responsibility had been rejected. Fear that the crown could one day be expected to honor names that no longer carried the burden of service. This is where the alleged Charles letter becomes so explosive. It appears, according to whispers, to confront one of the monarchy's most uncomfortable questions. Can someone remain close to royal benefit while standing far from royal obligation? That question cuts deeper than any headline. It touches the wound left by years of public conflict, private hurt, and institutional embarrassment. Meghan's supporters may see such a move as punishment. Palace loyalists may see it as protection. But within the old royal logic, the argument is brutally simple. Titles are not souvenirs. They are commitments. They belong to the machinery of duty, not the theater of fame. And once that principle was threatened, the palace could no longer pretend the matter was only personal, because legacy was now on the table. As questions about royal legacy intensified, attention inevitably turned toward the events that may have triggered this extraordinary response. What transformed private disagreements into what some insiders describe as a constitutional-level family dispute? According to various royal commentators, the answer lies in a series of fractures that steadily widened over time. One disagreement became two became 10, and before long, trust itself appeared to be hanging by a thread. After Harry and Meghan stepped away from royal duties, the palace faced a problem it had never fully prepared for: how to protect the dignity of the crown while two of its most famous names lived outside the system, yet remained tied to it in the eyes of the world. At first, there were hopes that distance might soften the wounds. Perhaps time would cool the anger. Perhaps public statements would slow down. Perhaps private bridges could still be repaired. But instead, the divide hardened. Interviews reopened old pain. Public accusations turned private disappointment into global debate. Then came more revelations, more commentary, more questions about who had been wronged, who had been protected, and who had been left behind. For the palace, the damage was not simply emotional. It was institutional. Every new controversy forced officials to ask whether royal connection was being used as a shield, a platform, or a weapon. That question reportedly unsettled senior figures more than any single headline ever could. Because monarchy survives on trust, and trust is not built only on blood. It is built on restraint, loyalty, silence, sacrifice, and the willingness to carry privilege with duty. Once that balance appeared broken, every future royal matter became more complicated. Could roles still be discussed normally? Could privileges remain untouched? Could long-term honors be left open when the relationship itself had become so unpredictable? These were not small questions whispered by gossip writers. They were the kind of questions that forced courtiers, advisors, and senior royals to look years ahead. And as relationships with key family members reportedly deteriorated, the emotional cost grew heavier. Charles was said to be caught between fatherhood and kingship, between grief over family distance and responsibility to the institution he had inherited. William, meanwhile, was increasingly viewed as the future guardian of a monarchy that could not afford another decade of chaos. Behind the public calm, the royal machinery was recalculating. Every title, every invitation, every ceremonial possibility began to carry a second meaning. The issue was no longer whether Harry and Meghan were loved, missed, resented, or misunderstood. The issue was whether the monarchy could safely keep doors open to future privileges while trust remained so badly damaged. And once peerages entered that conversation, the atmosphere changed completely. Titles reach beyond the present. They travel into the future. They shape descendants, expectations, and public standing. That is why the alleged sealed letter felt less like punishment and more like a warning from the crown itself. Some fractures cannot be ignored forever. Yet even amid years of disagreement, few expected the situation to reach the level of a formal royal intervention. Then came the moment that reportedly changed everything. Behind closed doors, with the monarchy facing uncertainty on multiple fronts, King Charles was said to have reached a conclusion that some advisors viewed as unavoidable. If reports are accurate, a decision had to be made not merely for today, but for the future of the crown itself. The alleged review did not begin as a dramatic declaration. It began, according to palace whispers, as a careful examination of what the monarchy could safely leave unresolved. Charles had inherited not only a throne but a storm, a wounded family, a restless public, a younger generation watching closely, and a future reign already taking shape under William's shadow. Every unresolved issue carried risk. Every open door carried meaning. And when the matter of future peerage access reportedly entered serious discussion, the atmosphere shifted from family management to institutional defense. Advisors were said to examine the long view, not the daily headline. What would happen 10 years from now? 20. Could the crown allow future honors to remain possible for figures who stood outside royal duty yet remained inside royal symbolism? Could a title once connected to service become a tool of status detached from obligation? These questions reportedly reached constitutional advisors, legal minds, and trusted royal officials who understood that the monarchy survives by controlling not only what it gives, but what it refuses to give. For Charles, the burden was deeply personal. Meghan was not merely a public figure in this debate. She was tied to his younger son, to grandchildren, to painful memories of a family fracture that had never fully healed. But kingship does not allow a man to act only as a father. The crown asks for harder choices. It demands that personal sorrow be weighed against public trust, and that, according to insiders, is where Charles finally reached the point of action. The sealed letter allegedly became the instrument of that decision. Quiet, formal, and devastating in its restraint, it did not need noise, it did not need spectacle. Its power came from the fact that it existed at all. Palace insiders reportedly described the move as final because it appeared to address not only present disputes, but future claims, future expectations, and future assumptions. Meghan's name, according to growing whispers, was not discussed as part of a temporary media controversy. It was discussed in relation to the structure of royal legacy itself. That is why the alleged drafting felt so severe. It suggested Charles was no longer trying simply to calm the waters. He was trying to build a wall before the next flood arrived. And in that wall, future peerage access became a locked gate, a boundary, a warning that the monarchy's honors would not be left vulnerable to pressure, sentiment, or public campaigns. The decision, if true, marked a chilling transformation in the royal response, from patience to protection, from hope to hard authority, from family pain to crown policy. But Charles was not acting entirely alone, because another powerful group within the royal family had reportedly reached similar conclusions. Royal history often focuses on kings and queens, but some of the monarchy's most consequential decisions emerge from alliances operating quietly behind the scenes. And according to persistent reports, a powerful coalition of senior royals may have helped shape the path that ultimately led to this controversial outcome. Inside the palace, power rarely announces itself loudly. It moves through careful conversations, shared concerns, and the slow agreement of people who understand that one careless decision can echo for generations. That is why whispers of senior support became so important. Charles may have carried the authority of the crown, but he was reportedly not the only figure worried about the future. Prince William, already seen by many as the monarchy's next great stabilizing force, had every reason to think beyond the present crisis. For him, this was not only about Meghan, Harry, or today's headlines. It was about the reign he will one day inherit, the titles that may outlive every argument, and the public trust that could either strengthen or weaken under his watch. Reports suggest William's influence within royal strategy has grown sharper, colder, and more deliberate. The younger prince once stood inside a family bond. Now, according to insiders, he stands inside a future king's burden. Beside that growing influence was Princess Anne, the iron-willed defender of duty, whose reputation has always rested on service rather than spectacle. Anne has long been viewed as the royal who understands the institution without needing applause from it. If she became part of these discussions, as some royal observers believe, then the message was unmistakable. Tradition itself had entered the room. Her position would not have been shaped by emotion alone. It would have been shaped by a lifetime of watching the crown survive through restraint, discipline, and sacrifice. Then there was Prince Edward, the quiet institutional figure often overlooked by the public, but trusted precisely because he does not chase the spotlight. In a family shaken by public drama, that kind of steadiness carries its own authority. Together, these figures reportedly formed not a rebellion against Charles, but a shield around him. They understood his pain. They understood the family wounds. But they also understood the danger of leaving future peerage questions unresolved. Their shared concern was simple and severe. The monarchy cannot afford confusion over who represents duty and who merely inherits its shine. Behind every reported discussion was the same hard truth. Titles are not decorative ornaments to be passed through damaged relationships without consequence. They are signals to the country. They tell the public who belongs close to the crown's mission. And if that signal becomes blurred, the entire institution begins to look vulnerable. That is why this alleged alliance mattered. It turned a private royal concern into a united institutional stance. Charles may have signed the letter, but the pressure behind it seemed to come from a deeper royal instinct. Protect continuity, defend legitimacy, and make sure the future is not held hostage by the unresolved battles of the past. As word of the alleged decision spread, attention quickly shifted from the palace to the people most directly affected by it. For Meghan, the implications of such reports would extend far beyond headlines. Royal titles and future peerages are not merely ceremonial matters. They shape perceptions, define relationships, and influence how future generations are viewed within the wider royal story. And suddenly, every assumption seemed open to question. The alleged decision, if true, would not only place Meghan at the center of another royal storm, it would force the world to ask what her place in that story truly remains. For years, her name has carried two identities at once. To supporters, she is the woman who challenged an ancient institution and refused to be silenced. To critics, she is the figure who walked away from duty but continued to benefit from royal proximity. That divide has never been soft. It has been sharp, loud, and deeply emotional. But this time, the debate felt different, because future peerages touch something more permanent than public approval. They touch recognition. They touch belonging. They touch whether the crown sees a person, and possibly the line connected to that person, as part of its long-term structure. Royal commentators quickly began speculating over how Meghan might receive such reports. Would she see them as personal rejection? Would she view them as proof that the palace had always intended to close ranks? Or would she understand that the monarchy, in its coldest moments, acts less like a family and more like a centuries-old machine protecting itself from risk? The international media seized on every angle. Some voices framed the alleged letter as cruel, another chapter in a painful royal rupture that has already left scars on both sides of the Atlantic. Others saw it as inevitable, arguing that titles cannot remain endlessly available to those no longer committed to the duties that give those titles meaning. And between those two camps, public opinion hardened again. Supporters spoke of fairness, independence, and the right to build a life away from palace control. Traditionalists answered with one brutal question: if royal responsibility has been rejected, why should future royal recognition remain untouched? That question carried the sting of finality. It moved the conversation beyond Meghan's personal popularity and into the realm of legacy. Because once future titles are discussed, the issue no longer belongs only to the adults involved. It reaches toward children, descendants, and the public story that will one day be told about who stood inside the monarchy and who stood outside it. That is where the emotional cost becomes impossible to ignore. Families may fracture privately, but royal families fracture under the weight of history. Every disagreement becomes a symbol. Every silence becomes strategy. Every closed door becomes a statement. And if Meghan's future peerage connection has truly been restricted, then the palace has done more than respond to controversy. It has suggested that some forms of royal distance may eventually become permanent. The wound, once personal, has now become structural. Yet the most significant consequence may have nothing to do with Meghan personally and everything to do with the monarchy's future direction. Beyond the headlines, beyond the controversy, and beyond the family drama lies a larger question. What kind of monarchy does King Charles hope to leave behind? According to many royal analysts, the answer may explain why such a dramatic step was reportedly considered necessary in the first place. Charles has long been associated with the idea of a slimmer, more focused monarchy, one less crowded by loose connections and more defined by visible service. But a streamlined crown is not only about fewer people on balconies or fewer names in official programs. It is about clarity. It is about making sure the public understands who works for the institution, who represents it, and who carries its burdens when the applause disappears. That is why the alleged sealed letter fits into a much larger royal pattern. It suggests that the palace may no longer be willing to let emotional history blur institutional responsibility. In earlier eras, the monarchy could absorb contradictions behind closed doors. It could allow titles, privileges, and family loyalties to overlap without explaining every detail to the public. But the modern crown lives under harsher light. Every decision is questioned. Every silence is interpreted. Every royal benefit is weighed against duty, funding, service, and trust. Charles, facing the fragile reality of his reign, reportedly understands that credibility cannot be inherited blindly. It must be defended. And that defense may require choices that feel cold in the moment, but strategic in the long arc of history. Future planning for William's reign sits at the center of this calculation. The monarchy Charles leaves behind will become the monarchy William must carry. Any confusion left unresolved today could become a crisis tomorrow. If future peerages remain open to those whose connection to royal duty is uncertain, William could one day inherit not only a throne, but a legal and symbolic battlefield. That possibility appears to have alarmed traditional voices within the palace. They wanted lines drawn before sentiment, pressure, or public campaigns could complicate the matter further. The alleged letter, then, becomes more than a response to Meghan. It becomes a statement about the rules of belonging. It says that royal recognition must be tied to royal responsibility. It says that prestige without service is dangerous. It says that the crown's future cannot be built on ambiguity. And perhaps most importantly, it suggests Charles is thinking less like a wounded father and more like a king preparing the ground for succession. That contrast is painful, but powerful. A father might hesitate forever, a king cannot. A father might hope every door remains open. A king must know which doors could weaken the house itself. This is where the story reaches its deeper emotional force. The monarchy is not simply punishing rebellion, it is redefining survival. It is choosing structure over sentiment, public trust over private longing, and the future over the unresolved ache of the past. And once that choice begins, it rarely stops with one letter, one title, or one name. And as the dust began to settle, one final reality emerged, one that may define this entire chapter of royal history. Whether viewed as an act of preservation or a moment of division, the alleged sealed letter has become symbolic of a monarchy confronting its future with unprecedented determination. The debate may continue for years, the reactions may never fully fade. But according to those closest to the institution, one thing is becoming increasingly clear. This was never only about Meghan, and it was never only about one document moving quietly through royal channels. It was about a crown deciding what it can no longer leave uncertain. From the first whispers of the sealed letter to the growing belief that future peerage access had been directly addressed, the entire controversy has exposed a deeper struggle between personal ties and public duty. On one side stands the pain of family fracture, the unanswered questions, the emotional cost of distance, and the human ache that follows when private wounds become public history. On the other side stands the institution itself, cold, ancient, and unforgiving, asking whether royal recognition can survive without royal responsibility. That is the line the palace now appears determined to defend. For Charles, the alleged decision may be remembered as one of the hardest acts of his reign, not because it was loud, but because it was quiet and final. For Meghan, it may mark another painful turning point in a story already filled with accusation, distance, and divided loyalty. For Harry, it raises an even more complicated shadow over what remains of his connection to the system he once served. But for William, the meaning may be clearest of all. The future king is watching the old conflicts settle into the foundations of the monarchy he will inherit. Every unresolved title, every blurred privilege, Every unanswered claim could one day become his burden. And so the alleged letter does more than close a door, it clears the path ahead. It tells future generations that royal identity will not be shaped by fame alone, by proximity alone, or by the lingering power of a name. It must be tied to service, discipline, and trust. That is the new order slowly taking form, a monarchy leaner, harder, less sentimental, and more willing to protect its borders before they are tested again. The public may argue over whether this is fairness or punishment, protection or rejection, strategy or coldness. But inside royal history, decisions are not measured only by emotion. They are measured by what survives after the shouting stops. And if these reports prove even partly true, then this moment may be remembered as the point where Charles, supported by the quiet force of the senior royals around him, chose legacy over hesitation. The wound may remain, the debate may burn, the family may never fully return to what it once was. But the crown has sent its signal. The future will not be negotiated through pressure, sympathy, or spectacle. Because in the end, royal history rarely remembers who protested the loudest, it remembers who ultimately shaped the future of the crown. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.